My name is Bitange Ndemo, and for the past few years, I've been chairing the committee, the task force in Kenya that was looking into developing the roadmap of artificial intelligence and the distributed ledgers. The government created this task force in 2019, and immediately we started gathering the data throughout the country. This was also trying to create awareness of the emerging technologies and be able to make people understand um, what they will do to the country, to talk about the risks and the benefits of these technologies, and be able to generally understand that we were getting into the fourth industrial revolution. As the Constitution demands, we needed to do consultations with mainly stakeholders. Many of them were regulators, then private sector who were looking forward to implementation of this technology. Around March 2019, 2020, we had come up with a report. This report basically was the work that we had done in terms of gathering information from citizens. Once you develop a report in Kenya, you still again have to go back with the same report to consult with the stakeholders. And we also did the same thing, that here is the report that we have come up with. This is the report which we gathered information from the citizens. And towards the mid of 2020, we had completed the report. And towards the end of July of 2020, the government formally adopted the report. So we relaunched the report, and then we began to monitor the adoption of artificial intelligence mostly, and blockchain. And we noted that there were so many applications in artificial intelligence, and which was good because the adoption of AI, especially around fintechs, was brought greater inclusivity because we began to see lending platforms giving loans that were non-collateralized, and we saw as more private sector companies invested in this space, the price for lending began to drop. But of course, there were other things. For example, there were young people who borrowed the non-collateralized loans to use it for mainly gambling, and this brought a lot of problems that the central bank intervened and threatened to begin to regulate, and indeed they developed the bill to regulate especially the use of AI in lending. That bill is still in Parliament. Towards the end of July 2020, we launched the report. Launching meant that we again go back to stakeholders to show them what indeed we had made, the recommendations that we had made, what we were doing with that report. And at the same time, we were monitoring precisely what was taking place in the country. Here, we again noted that even in farming, we were seeing adoption of AI in health and other places. So after the launch of the report, the government also started working on a digital strategy, how it was going to move forward with the digitalization or using digital for economic growth. But at the same time, while the government was moving forward, we began to see new social media attacks on politicians using platforms like TikTok, which are which have heavy AI use at the back end. And when the members of parliament began to talk about deep fakes, and which was highly publicized that it was artificial intelligence that was enabling them to create what they are creating in TikTok, they immediately began to push for regulation of use of AI. This was problematic because as we faced senators and members of parliament, the demand was that we have a proper regulation. And we pushed ahead, trying to tell them that not many countries had considered regulation because we could very easily stifle innovation if we hurriedly created um, innovation within Kenya. Um, but what happened afterwards was that the government, I mean, members of parliament went ahead, developed the law, but it hasn't gone through parliament. We are still debating that we need to wait a little to understand what would happen with respect to these emerging technologies. So the question now is that what were the goals of AI in terms of what we were doing? Um, we had very simple goals. For example, we need to track and trace transactions. This came from the Revenue Authority, came from anti-money laundering in Kenya. Um, they they had high hopes that this emerging tech could slow down corruption by tracking and tracing some of the transactions. Then we also wanted systems integrity through biometric identity, and that's how um, the Kenyan biometric identity was created. Then streamline democracy and elections. Here, Kenya had so many problems with elections. Every electoral cycle, we had problems, and mostly the electoral body wanted to manage, especially counting, by use of blockchain and, if possible, artificial intelligence. Then we wanted to facilitate financial inclusion, further leverage on AI to bring new solutions that would assist citizens. Like I said, inclusive financial services like non-collateralized loans. Then we also wanted to improve public service delivery. Um, the government had deployed AI in many areas, from transportation to several other places. We have had applications of AI used. Then, the last but not least, the reduction of transaction costs. This is happening, and we would see a lot of efficiencies created in this space. But we also were focusing on the agenda for the current government. Current government had committed to ensure food security, and indeed, artificial intelligence is helping in this space. As I said, in agriculture, we have seen the application of AI, improved productivity, and that would solve the problem of food insecurity in the country. Um, the government also had an objective of dealing effectively with health, leveraging technology. And if you look at the diagnostics where we have used AI, and in some areas like in several areas where we have used AI in health, it has helped to reduce the cost. Then housing, we looked to reduce um, transaction cost and raise funds for affordable housing. And we discussed with the players in that sector to be able to use the technologies, and we're beginning to see some uptake in that space. The fourth item, which was the government's agenda, was manufacturing, where we were encouraging use of 3D print in order to facilitate prototyping and moving quickly into manufacturing. Uh, this I don't think has moved very fast, but we are hoping that a lot of this adoption of these technologies would enable better understanding of manufacturing and leveraging these technologies to improve productivity in the space. So basically, we wanted to improve, promote private sector and public sector innovations through enabling regulatory regimes by using regulatory sandbox. This is important because if government moved fast to regulate without understanding what is happening, that would be stifling innovation. And also, we were seeking multi-sector partnership, creating supportive ecosystem through cross collaborations. This has worked very well, and this is important because the country has not developed sufficient capacity to move forward with this technology. That's why we were looking at cross collaborations, which have worked very well. Even now, in the area of capacity building, we are working with universities in Germany and in the US to develop local capacity. Then investment and government support through active investment that act as a proof of concept. Very important that the government takes the first step and then private sector can be able to understand and get into the space. The last point is emerging technologies, brain trust, meaning that we generate strategies for government on use of technology to best serve the citizens, harmonize usage of technology across government, and support implementation on these initiatives. So the task force came up with some recommendations. These include to develop supportive policies to enable both short and long-term use of AI by analyzing existing policies and creating new policies to ensure citizens' rights are protected. Then number two was to create an effective ecosystem to support, manage, and grow AI solutions, including infrastructure skills and skills development and cross-sector linkages. This has worked actually very well. The private and government working together. Universities are now getting to understand what the private sector needs. For example, we have seen very good response to capacity building by governments beginning to understand that there is a mismatch between what the companies need and what we produce from universities. This is very key. We need such collaborations in order to feed into the universities and provide the necessary capacity that is needed. One of the fastest area growing is data and data use. And of course, data translates more into artificial intelligence. And this is the area we want to exploit more by developing better capacity for the country to be able to succeed in that space. So people ask, how widely has AI been applied in Kenya? Although I've mentioned a couple of areas of implementation, the area that AI has been fully exploited is around fintechs. As I said, credit scoring, process optimization, security, and customer service. Of course, whenever you talk about money in public sector, the cyber criminals would want to come, and the best way to use or the best way to protect is through AI, and we have seen that being applied in the area of health, radiology, decision making, and training. AI is being used in education. The previous system that used to leave a lot of children who had potential to finish, to proceed with education. Now we see startups around the area of adaptive learning, and this is solving a major problem which we did not understand. At the same time, the Kenyan government changed the education system to what we call competence-based curriculum. This is very key because it is so much related to what we need to achieve in adaptive learning. So we have seen that move from the first grade to around the fifth grade, and in another 6 to 7 years, it would have gone through all the grade school into the university. So the universities, for example, are beginning to prepare for the new students who have gone through a totally different system. In transportation, we have seen implementation of intelligence transport systems. In customer relations, we are seeing chatbots being used, which is AI. So there is widespread use of AI in virtually every sector. I would say the back-end offices, artificial intelligence in audit services. So Kenya has quite extensively used artificial intelligence even before we come up with the new regulations. So the regulatory policy landscape, just like many countries, the regulatory and policy landscape for AI is an emerging issue in virtually every jurisdiction globally, including the European Union. I happen to be one of the panel of experts for artificial intelligence for OECD. Even here, we are at the discussion level with respect to regulation. Between 2016 and 2019, a wave of AI ethics guidelines were published in order to maintain social control over technology. I've actually been using those because I was among the people who developed them to talk to Kenyan government before we develop our own regulations. So what I'm talking about is the OECD artificial intelligence principles. These are global initiatives because they got people from virtually every part of the world. And one of those principles is that AI should benefit people and the planet by driving inclusive growth, sustainable development, and well-being. The second is AI systems should be designed in a way that respects the rule of law, human rights, democratic values, and diversity, and they should include appropriate safeguards. For example, enabling human intervention where necessary to ensure a fair and just society. So the third one is there should be transparency and responsible disclosure around AI systems to ensure that people understand AI-based outcomes and can challenge them. The fourth one is AI systems must be the fourth one is AI system must function in a robust secure and safe way throughout their life cycle, and potential risks should be continually assessed and managed. Then the last one is organizations and the individual developing, deploying, or operating AI systems should be held accountable for their proper functioning in line with the above principles. This is very important, that everybody who is applying artificial intelligence must be responsible for the systems they are deploying. One of the areas of interest that we've been discussing, the university and the private sector, is exploitation of AI, especially in natural language processing. This is the first time that we can create and patent some of the translations of local languages. Africa, with its 2,000 languages, gives an opportunity for creating many patents as we translate these for machines to understand what is happening, and using those machines, especially in teaching, especially in helping people with disabilities and other things. The area that has been opened for new patents is huge. And one of the areas that we have been discussing around universities is to exploit these low-hanging fruits and be able to create more resources for universities, and help these universities to support themselves by simply getting down onto the ground and seeing the opportunities that these technologies can create. We are also looking at many other areas. This is from the university working in collaboration with the private sector to be able to exploit these emerging technologies, and respecting the principles that I just listed. We managed to have one sandbox at the Capital Market Authority, and I'm aware of several innovations that are under the sandbox that soon would come out. This is critical. Once that happens, then other regulators will be comfortable to allow sandboxing some of the innovations that are coming up from the many incubation centers that we have in the country. At the moment, many of the regulators are very cautious about whatever that is coming out of the labs which contains artificial intelligence. For some reason, they think AI is going to completely undermine them by taking over. But these are things that we must assure all the regulators that there is AI for good. Of course, there are areas of concern, but not as severe as they could be thinking. So on a regular basis, we've been discussing with many regulators to simply take time, understand these emerging technologies, that AI would help us in terms of competitiveness, and that has been demonstrated in the financial sector and other sectors. In agriculture, for example, we are seeing food productivity improvement within a very short period of time, and that is the reason why we initially thought the committee would be disbanded, but there is a lot of work for the committee to do in order to evangelize data, to simplify the data for consumption. The government of Kenya introduced a digital learning program, but in this program, we also need to talk about some of the technologies that would facilitate productivity improvement in virtually every sector. So we have done quite a bit, and we hope to do more going forward. So I thank you for listening to me, and hopefully next year we would give a more comprehensive report on the improvement or on the progress that we have made with artificial intelligence. Thank you.